The marble was colder than she expected. That was the thought Diana had when her arms finally gave out 3 steps from the center of the throne room. After 3 hours of corridor floors and staircases, and one desperate calculation made while the man who hurt her stood on the other side of a closed door. After all of that, what her exhausted mind offered her was that throne room marble was colder than servant corridors. She had made it, through the doors, across the floor. Far enough that turning back was no longer a choice. Her arms were gone. Her legs had stopped cooperating somewhere around the second staircase. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and she was shaking so badly she could feel it in her teeth. But she had made it to the right room, the only room in the entire castle where what she was about to say could not be buried afterward. "It hurts." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. In the absolute silence of 200 people holding their breath, it carried all the way to the throne. "I can't stop shaking." She had one chance at this. One man who had been back in the castle for less than 14 hours. Not long enough for the person who did this to reach him first. One 3-year-old story about a stable boy that Diana had carried like evidence for years. Her only proof that the man on that throne was worth the risk of trusting. She had bet everything on that story being true. And then Alpha King Daniel Braun stepped down from his throne. He did not call a guard. He did not gesture for someone to handle it. He walked across the throne room floor through 200 frozen witnesses and knelt on the marble directly in front of her. His red cloak spread around him. His gauntleted hand came to rest against her cheek. Slow, deliberate, the touch of a man who understood that a person shaking this badly flinches at surprise. The throne room did not make a sound. In that moment, Diana understood 2 things simultaneously: that the story had been true, and that she had no idea yet how far the truth was about to reach. Before we show you how Diana got to that floor, you need to understand something. She did not end up there by accident. She did not collapse in the wrong room at the wrong time and get lucky. Every step that brought her through those doors was a calculated decision made while her body was failing and the clock was running out. This is the story of a woman who had been invisible her entire working life and chose, in the worst moment of that life, to be impossible to ignore. 3 hours earlier, she had been standing in a lord's private chambers, and what she overheard in those 40 seconds was the reason everything that followed had to happen exactly as it did. Diana had known something was wrong with Lord Casimir Vielle since his 2nd day in the castle. She could not have explained it precisely, not then. It was the way his eyes moved when he entered a room, cataloging exits before faces. The way he spoke to servants with the particular smoothness of a man who needed them not to remember him clearly. The way his coat had been damaged, not by catching on something but by being grabbed. She could see it in the stress pattern of the torn embroidery, the direction of the pull. She had repaired enough damaged clothing to know the difference between an accident and a struggle. But she was the seamstress. She repaired what she was given and asked no questions. This was how survival worked in Castle Braun. There is a kind of knowing that people who are considered unimportant develop over years of watching the powerful operate at close range. Diana had spent 3 years in that castle, moving through every level. Noble quarters, private dining rooms, guard stations, corridors where plans were made and never meant to be overheard. She had learned to read rooms the way her father, a castle guard for 18 years, had taught her to read situations. Not what people said, what they did when they thought no one was watching. The seamstress was never significant, which meant Diana had watched everything. She delivered Casimir's repaired coat to his chambers at the arranged time. The door was slightly open. She knocked. No answer. She entered because she had a delivery and a day full of other work waiting. The voices from the inner room stopped her before she had taken 3 steps inside. 2 men, speaking in the flat, careful tone of people who believe themselves completely alone. And then she heard Daniel's name used in a sentence that turned her blood cold. She did not move, did not breathe. Stood with the coat still in her hands and her heart hammering against her ribs, and listened for 40 seconds that changed everything she understood about why she had been afraid of this man since the moment he arrived. The trade alliance was a cover. The real agreement. Territorial access for an enemy force during winter, when the northern border would be nearly empty. Someone inside the castle already paid. And a name. A commander's name. Someone Diana had seen standing at Daniel's shoulder every Thursday for 3 years. She turned to leave. Casimir was standing in the doorway. She would remember what followed in pieces. Pain has a way of editing memory, keeping what matters and releasing the rest as mercy. What she remembered clearly was the corridor floor afterward, the specific cold of stone against her palms. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her legs refused to hold her. And Casimir's voice through the closed door. Calm as still water. No one will believe a seamstress. She lay there for a moment, not from helplessness, from the specific effort of a person forcing a fractured mind to think clearly under conditions designed to make clear thinking impossible. No one will believe you. The most reliable weapon of people who cause harm in private. It works not because it is true, but because it is delivered with the certainty of someone who has used it before and watched it work. What Casimir did not understand about Diana, what he could not understand, because to understand it, he would have had to see her as a person worth studying, was that she was not calculating whether she would be believed. She was calculating how to make disbelief structurally impossible. Those are not the same problem. And Deanna, who had been making precise, quiet calculations her entire working life, was very good at the second one.
She ran through her options the way her father had taught her. What do you have? Who can you trust? What is the fastest route to the one outcome that matters? She could not go to any commander. Casimir had had 4 days to compromise the castle's internal channels, and the name she had heard proved at least one of them was already gone. She could not send a message. Messages could be intercepted. She could not wait. By tonight, Casimir would know exactly what she had overheard, and she would not see tomorrow. Daniel had returned from the northern border last night. 14 hours in the castle. Not long enough for Casimir to own anyone in his immediate circle yet. And today was Thursday. Thursday morning public audience. 2 hours during which any person in the kingdom could bring a grievance directly to the king. In a room full of witnesses, where whatever was said could not be quietly buried, because 200 people would have heard it simultaneously. But there was something else Diana understood, that the public audience gave her beyond witnesses.
She understood that Casimir's men could not drag her out of a formal royal proceeding in front of 200 people without creating exactly the kind of scene that would make everything she had overheard immediately credible. The throne room was the one place in the castle where the act of silencing her would prove everything she was trying to say. This is what made Diana extraordinary. Not the crawling, not the courage, not the willingness to suffer. What made her extraordinary was this. In the worst moment of her life, with her body failing and the clock running and every option narrowing, she thought 3 moves ahead. She did not just ask, "How do I get to the king?" She asked how I get to the king in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to stop what happens next. The throne room on a Thursday morning was not a scene of desperation. It was precision. And precision, as her father always said, is what separates people who survive from people who almost did. She started moving. She did not stop. The story returns to where we began. Daniel knelt directly in front of her, not beside, in front, his body a wall between Diana and 200 watching eyes. His red cloak spread across the marble. His gauntleted hand against her cheek, careful and deliberate, the touch of someone who understood that a person shaking this badly flinches at surprise. "Who did this to you?" Quiet, only for her. "Before you move me." Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "I need to tell you something here, in front of all of these witnesses, before anyone moves me anywhere, so it cannot disappear after. She is injured and shaking, and she is setting conditions. Not begging, not collapsing. She is using the last of her strategic clarity to make sure that the truth she carried across that floor cannot be managed away the moment someone moves her somewhere private, and the audience is dismissed. She had not just planned to reach Daniel. She had planned to reach him here, in this room, in front of these people, in this proceeding. Because in a witnessed formal audience, the truth becomes part of the official record. And official records, Diana understood, are significantly harder to make disappear than seamstresses. As something moved in Daniel's expression. A recalibration. The adjustment a man makes when what he is encountering is not what he prepared for. He nodded once. "Tell me here," she told him. Quietly, but the hall was so silent that the quiet reached every corner. Casimir's name, the trade alliance covers, the territorial access plan, the winter border vulnerability, and the commander's name, spoken carefully, but heard by every person present with absolute clarity. The throne room grew more silent, the specific silence of something spoken that cannot be unspoken. Daniel's face did not change. His commanders would talk about this detail afterward. That his face absolutely did not change, but his hands on his knees went completely still. The particular stillness of fury held on the shortest possible leash. "Get Casimir." Quiet. Nobody moved for half a second. Now. Still quiet. The room broke into controlled motion around the two of them. Daniel did not move from the floor. He could have stood, could have lifted Diana and handed her to a healer and resumed his throne and handled everything from above. The way kings handle things. He chose the floor. That single choice said something to every person in that room that no proclamation could have delivered. How you treat the most vulnerable person in the room is who you actually are. The throne is performance. The floor is a character. and 200 witnesses understood the difference between them in the same instant.
"Can you stand?"
He asked.
"Not yet." "Then we stay here,"
he said simply.
"until you can."
Lord Casimir entered with his composure intact, a man who understood that composure is its own argument. He looked at Diana beside the king and arranged his expression into patient concern.
"Your Majesty, surely you are not entertaining accusations from a servant girl based on what she claims to have overheard. Servants listen at doors. It is simply her name,"
Daniel said quietly,
"is Diana."
Complete silence.
"And she is not the only witness."
Casimir had calculated correctly that no one would believe a seamstress. What he had not calculated, could not have calculated, because it required knowing something about Daniel that only the invisible people of this castle knew, was that Daniel had not returned from the northern border early because the border situation was resolved. He had come back because his own intelligence network had been building a case against Casimir for 3 days before Casimir arrived. Diana's testimony was not the beginning. It was the piece that closed what was already built. The seamstress he dismissed as insignificant had walked directly into the one room where her account would be witnessed, recorded, and irrefutable. This is the mistake that people who underestimate others always make. They confuse status with significance. Status is assigned. Significance is determined by what a person knows and what they are willing to do with it. Diana knew everything, and she had been willing to crawl across marble to do something with it. The commander whose name Diana had spoken was brought in separately. His face, when he entered and saw Diana beside the king, told the room everything before a word was spoken. 200 witnesses watched guilt arrive on a man's face in real time. Casimir's composure fractured, not dramatically, but fractured. The microscopic recalculation of a man realizing the board he believed he controlled had been set against him before he placed a single piece. "You have been here 4 days," Daniel said, still on the floor, voice carrying without effort. "In those 4 days, you arranged territorial access for an enemy force, coordinated that access during deliberate military vulnerability, and paid a member of my personal command to ensure it went uncontested." Diana overheard the conversation, confirming the final details. She came here because she needed witnesses. He looked at every face in that hall. She has them. Before the detainment orders, before anything else, Daniel called for the castle recorder. Aldrich, who had documented Braun's public audiences for 31 years, came forward with his leather-bound book. His expression was carefully neutral. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the page. "Enter the following," Daniel said, still kneeling. "That on this Thursday morning, during a public audience, Diana, castle seamstress, 3 years in service, delivered testimony regarding a conspiracy against this kingdom at personal risk and high physical cost to herself. That her account was witnessed by all persons present and independently verified. That her testimony is entered into the official record with full legal standing, equal to any noble account, any commander's report, any lord's declaration. Her word is the word of a witness. Oh, it stands! In a world where a servant's word means nothing against a noble's denial, where no one will believe a seamstress is not just a threat, but an accurate description of how the system functions, Daniel has just made Diana's account permanently and legally irrefutable. Not believed privately, made officially, permanently, publicly true, in the record, in front of witnesses. There is a profound difference between a powerful person saying, I believe you in a private room and making your truth part of the official record in front of 200 people. One is kindness, the other is justice. Diana had not crawled across that floor for kindness. One more thing. Enter this also. Lord Casimir Vael stated that no one would believe a seamstress. Daniel looked at every face in that hall. Servants with their hands over their mouths, Zen nobles who came expecting a land dispute, commanders standing at their posts. Let the record show that every person in this room believed her. The sound that followed was not applause. It was something older, the collective exhale of 200 people who had been holding something without knowing it and had just been permitted to put it down. Several servants were crying. 3 of the oldest nobles looked at each other with the expression of men, realizing they had spent years underestimating their king. Casimir was detained before the hour was out. The commander confessed before the day ended, with the specific relief of a man who has carried something too heavy for too long and finds, when the moment comes to put it down, that the floor beneath him is solid after all. But the most important thing Daniel did that day had nothing to do with Casimir. Diana would not understand it until 3 weeks later, when he walked into her workroom and set something on the workbench beside her needle and thread without saying a word about what it meant. She had not expected the room, a proper room in the guest wing with an east-facing window. Diana chose not to examine that detail too closely. The healer Lyra visited twice daily. "You'll heal," she said on the second day. "The physical part." A pause waited with experience. "The rest takes longer, but it goes faster when a person has something worth getting better for." Daniel came on the 3rd evening. He knocked and waited. He sat in the chair across from the window, like a man who had decided this was where he was going to be. "The Eastern Territories have filed a formal protest," he said, "arguing the proceeding was irregular, that a servant's testimony cannot carry equal legal standing." "What did you tell them?" "That the record stands, and that anyone wishing to dispute official documentation of a witnessed public proceeding is welcome to appear before the full council of the 5 kingdoms and make that argument in front of everyone." He is telling her that what happened in the throne room was not a temporary gesture, not a compassionate moment that the machinery of power would quietly correct afterward. The record stands. One of the most damaging things that happens to people after harm is not the harm itself, but the discovery that the safety was borrowed. The people who helped were not going to stay. Diana had spent years learning not to trust ground too quickly. Daniel was making this ground permanent, publicly on the record, where she could see it clearly and never have to wonder whether it would hold. 2 weeks after the throne room, Diana returned to her workbench, the east-facing window, the morning silence, the familiar weight of needle and thread in hands that had remembered their steadiness. She was making a coat for the stable master. His had surrendered after a winter too many, and he could not afford a new one. She had the material. Someone had to do it, while she is still healing, while her name is being disputed in Eastern Territories. While the proceeding that nearly cost her everything is being reviewed by councils across 5 kingdoms, she is making a coat for the stable master because he cannot afford one. And she has the material. This is a person whose fundamental orientation toward the world has not been broken by what happened to her. Notice what needs doing. Do it. Move forward. The ability to remain exactly yourself after the world has done its worst to you cannot be taught. It can only be chosen every single day. And Diana was choosing it. She heard his footsteps in the corridor before he knocked, unhurried and deliberate. She did not look up when the door opened. Daniel looked at the coat taking shape under her hands. "What is that for?" "The stable master. His coat is beyond repair." A pause. "You're making a coat for the stable master." The tone of a man encountering something simultaneously simple and completely unexpected. Someone has to. He cannot afford a new one. He came in and sat in the chair across from the workbench, like a man who had decided to stay. "I heard what Casimir said to you in that corridor," he said, "that no one would believe a seamstress." He looked at her steadily. "What made you come anyway?" She looked up at him, at this king, who had stayed on the floor with her until she could stand, who had put her name in the permanent record, who was currently sitting in her workroom watching her make a coat for a stable master. He had probably never spoken to her directly. "3 years ago," she said, "you punished a noble for beating a stable boy." Daniel waited. "Servants talk," she said. "True things travel. I heard that story within a week, and I carried it for 3 years like evidence." She held his gaze. "When I was on that corridor floor, I ran through every option I had. You had been back in the castle for 14 hours, the only person Casimir had not had time to reach. And the stable boy's story was the only proof I had that you were worth the risk of trusting." She paused. "So I came." 3 years before this story, Daniel did a small thing. Punished a noble for beating a stable boy. Not a strategy, not performance. A minor act of basic decency that cost him something in noble goodwill and gained him nothing obvious. He probably did not think about it again after it was done. But in the kitchens and the stables and the seamstress's workroom and every corridor where servants did the invisible work that keeps the visible world running, that story lived, was repeated, was kept, became the only evidence a woman on a corridor floor needed to make the most important decision of her life. This is what people mean when they say character is built in small moments. Not in throne room declarations, not in formal proceedings. In the moments when no one important is watching, you do the right thing anyway. Because someone is always watching. And the people you least expect are keeping the record, long before you need them to. He reached into his coat and set a document on the workbench beside her needle and thread. A formal record page, castle seal in the corner. Her father's name is in careful official script. Guard Erickson, 18 years of service. Commendations in the 3rd and 7th years. Died in the line of duty protecting a junior officer during the Eastern Border incident. He paused. That junior officer is now a senior commander. He was in the throne room during your proceedings. Another pause. He cried. Some people carry the weight of what they owe and never find a way to put it down because the person they owe it to is gone. Diana's father had protected a man who went on to have a life that her father's death made possible. That man had stood in a throne room and watched the daughter of the man who saved him receive the justice her father never got to see. Not from guilt, from the grief of a debt that cannot be repaid, and the gratitude of learning that the line of a person's legacy had not ended. That her father's protection, given in one corridor moment 30 years ago, had produced a daughter who crawled across a throne room floor carrying kingdom-saving truth, because he had taught her that fear was information, not instruction. Some things we do for people echo further than we will ever know. Diana sat with her father's name in the room for a moment. Let it be present before she handled it. Then she picked it up, read it once, read it again, set it on the table where she could see it from anywhere in the room. "Thank you," she said. "He earned it," Daniel said simply. "The record should have said so all along." The silence between them held something neither of them rushed to name. Some things need to exist without a name for a while. Need to become real before language is asked to contain them. "Were you afraid?" he asked. "On that corridor floor." "Completely," she said. "But you came anyway. My father taught me that fear is information, not instruction. Those brave people are not people without fear. They are people who have learned that fear is not the final word on what they do next." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, not the controlled expression from the throne room, something smaller and considerably more human. "Your father sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. "He was," she said quietly. She looked back at the coat in her hands. "He really was." The formal proceedings concluded 3 weeks later. The Council of the Five Kingdoms reviewed the record, written while Daniel knelt on the marble floor, and found it complete, properly witnessed, irrefutable. Casimir was stripped of his Eastern territorial authority. The trade alliance dissolved permanently. New diplomatic protocols were established, and one structural change nobody on the council had anticipated: a permanent representative from the castle's service staff on the board that reviewed all alliance negotiations going forward. One person from the service staff, no on the council. It sounds small. It is not small. It is the difference between justice as a single event and justice as an architecture. Between punishing the person who caused harm and changing the conditions that made the harm possible in the first place. Daniel had understood what Diana showed him, that the people best positioned to notice when something dangerous is happening are precisely the ones the system was designed to ignore. Building one of them into the room where decisions are made does not just honor what Diana did, it makes the lesson permanent. So the next Casimir finds a different room than the last one did. Diana accepted the formal council position, with standing, with a stipend, with her name in the permanent record behind it. She kept the east-facing workroom. Daniel came back on irregular mornings, not every morning, not on any schedule, in the way a person returns to a place where they find they are simply themselves without effort. Sometimes they talked about the council or the kingdom or things that needed repairing, which in Diana's experience was always more than people admitted. Sometimes they sat in the silence of two people who had been through something real together and found that real silence was more comfortable than performed conversation. One morning, he arrived to find her at the window, not working, just watching the light come in. He sat in his chair. "Tell me something," he said. Diana looked at this king who had chosen the floor. Who had put her name in the record? Who had found her father's file in the archives and brought it to her workbench without making a speech about it? Who had come back, morning after morning, to a small workroom with an east-facing window and sat in a chair across from her needle and thread and simply stayed? "I'm not afraid of the ground anymore," she said. Daniel looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Neither am I," he said. The light came through the east window exactly as it always had, showing everything clearly. Here is what this story is actually about. It is about what happens when the people who have been made invisible decide, on one corridor floor, with nothing left except the decision itself, to be seen. Diana did not change the kingdom by being extraordinary. she changed it by doing the ordinary thing courage requires. Moving toward the truth when the truth was expensive to carry. And Daniel did not earn her trust by being powerful. He earned it 3 years earlier in a small moment when no one important was watching. By doing the right thing anyway. Because someone is always watching. And the people you least expect are keeping the record, long before you need them to. If Diana's story stayed with you, subscribe to Forbidden Luna Stories for a brand new story every week. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share it with them. We will see you in the next story.